catching the laser. Was cheating a major crime? Logically, I knew it wasn't. Yet, when I saw my wife with someone else entering that hotel, a part of me felt differently. It's good that I had cooled down by the time I reached my truck, where I briefly glanced at the barrel stored in the center console. I carry it for safety, given the large amounts of cash my job involves, though I've only used it for practice shooting. I enjoy owning it, and it's my right, so why not? I rang up my boss, explaining I needed the rest of the day, maybe even the next, off. It was time to get a lawyer and plan my next steps. I withdrew $3,000 from our joint account and opened a new one in my name. There was still a fair sum left, enough for this month's rent and bills. We had only one emergency credit card, which I promptly canceled. Our housing situation was flexible, being on a month-to-month lease, and we didn't have kids to consider. Forgiving her was out of the question, especially after discovering this wasn't her first time. I'd found multiple hotel charges on our credit card. She'd been covering them up with transfers from our bank account. If I hadn't stumbled upon these transactions, I'd have remained in the dark. Ironically, a glitch with my debit card led to this discovery. It was a chain of events, checking the bank balance, noticing the credit card payment, and then uncovering the charges. That's what led me to the hotel today, and now to the decision of divorcing my unfaithful wife. I should have confronted her earlier, but I was still grappling with the possibility of her infidelity. Now, with evidence in hand, I was ready to act. I found a lawyer specializing in divorce cases and was relieved to learn that, given our 4-year marriage and her decent job, the financial impact might be minimal. After dealing with these matters, I went home and grabbed a beer. That's when the full weight of the situation hit me. Despite everything, I realized I still had feelings for her. Why would she do this? Did I do something wrong? To avoid sinking into self-pity, I started marking items in the house I wanted to keep, mostly my gaming systems, TV, and workout gear. Everything else just reminded me too much of her. Wandering around, my thoughts turned darker, fantasizing about getting back at them. I imagined leaving her stranded in a remote cabin or injuring him so badly he'd be defenseless in the wild. I even thought of giving him a faulty ex for a false escape from his plight. But then I recognized these thoughts were extreme. That's not who I am, nor who I want to be. Then it dawned on me that life isn't as perfect as in stories, so it was best to end the marriage and move on. I was heartbroken. I had envisioned a future with Gwen, growing old together and starting a family. All our memories flooded back, my proposal at the theater where we first met on a blind date, our weekend getaway at Myrtle Beach, the days spent by her father's bedside during his illness, our discussions about relocating for my job, and the intimate moments we shared, especially during that power outage in a winter storm. But now, these memories were tainted by the image of her laughing and holding hands with someone else as they entered a hotel room. My thoughts were interrupted by the sound of the door. "Julian, why are you home so early?" she asked, approaching to embrace me. I kept my distance, unable to hide my disappointment. It was evident that something was amiss. "Gwen, let's be honest. I know about your affair with your coworker. You should start deciding what you want to keep. You'll be getting divorce papers by Wednesday," I said firmly. Her reaction was surprising. She almost seemed relieved. "I'm truly sorry, Julian. I shouldn't have deceived you. You deserved honesty," she replied softly. "Are you sorry for the betrayal or just for being caught?" I asked, feeling bitter. "I regret not telling you earlier that I was unhappy. I should have been brave enough to ask for a divorce months ago." "You deserve better from me," she said, her eyes welling with tears. "So you've been with him for months." I couldn't hide the anger and hurt in my voice. "No, it's only been a few times in the past weeks," she admitted. "But I've been wanting to leave the marriage for about 6 months. "Why?" I asked, feeling like my world was unraveling. "I'm 25, and I don't want to live within strict rules. I want the freedom to stay out late with friends, to not worry about drinking too much at social events, and to make frivolous purchases without guilt. I don't want to constantly think about future responsibilities," she explained, her tone becoming more heated. "So, you're choosing to abandon responsibility and revisit your carefree early 20s. Well, you've got it. I've taken half our savings and will be off the lease by tomorrow. I also withdrew some extra cash for a health checkup, considering our recent intimacy and your involvement with him. I can't trust you to have been cautious. You wanted freedom, now enjoy it with your new circle and job." Despite trying to stay composed, my voice rose in frustration. "Yes, Jules, I was just legal when we married. There's so much of life we both missed. At that time, I thought I was content, but now I have doubts. Spending time with Jeremy and his friends made me recall the fun we used to have, just being youthful and a bit reckless," she responded, sounding defensive. "How does missing out on life justify your infidelity? How does it excuse being unfaithful while we're still married? I believed we were at least friends. Friends don't betray each other like this. You've really outdone yourself, you know. I thought my mom and sister were the only negative examples, but it seems to be a common trait." I realized then that I needed to lower my voice. Gwen flinched when I mentioned my mom and sister. My father had left due to my mom's infidelity, spiraling into alcoholism, and eventually passed away from alcohol poisoning, a discovery I made during a visit. My mom seemed more concerned about the loss of child support than his death. The little inheritance we received, she spent on cosmetic surgeries. She even encouraged my sister Adrian to pursue wealthy partners for financial security. Adrian followed this advice, getting involved with Tony Winger, a wealthy auto dealer's son, and became pregnant. However, a paternity test revealed Tony wasn't the father, leading to their breakup. Facing this predicament, Adrian sought an unsafe solution and tragically passed away from a resulting infection. My mom, seeing no financial gain from pursuing legal action, dropped the matter entirely. The following year, as I struggled through school, my home life was chaotic with my mom's choices in partners. A month into college, I was pulled out of class by police officers with news of my mother's fatal car accident. She and her boss, caught in an affair and fleeing from his wife, crashed while under the influence. Surprisingly, my mother had left some assets: a house, a car, a decent retirement, a savings account, and a hidden stash of money and DVDs, the latter revealing more about her lifestyle than I wanted to know. I spent a month sorting out her affairs, meeting some of the men who came to pay respects, likely connected to what was on the DVDs. After selling the house and saving the money, I returned to college, living frugally and focusing solely on my studies. My experiences had left me with a jaded view of relationships. I engaged in casual encounters but kept an emotional distance, wary of getting too involved. I graduated among the top of my class and secured a managerial position at a promising construction company. My social life also picked up. I would go out with colleagues, and often, a group of women would join us. Over time, my perspective softened, and I began to think that maybe, just maybe, there could be a good woman out there. Then I met Gwen on a blind date. She was slightly younger, freshly graduated in accounting, and working in forensic accounting for the state police. Things seemed perfect, but it turned out to be another disappointment. Gwen was now visibly upset, which only fueled my anger. She wanted out of our marriage, betrayed me, and now she was the one in tears. I couldn't tolerate it anymore. I felt a switch flip inside me, and suddenly, I was detached. Legal papers will be served to you at your workplace on Wednesday. I've marked what I want from the apartment, and I'll be taking them tomorrow. We'll keep our respective cars. My name will be removed from the lease at the end of the month. You can decide what you want to do with the apartment then. I've taken half the money from our joint account. The credit card needs to be paid off and canceled. I don't want this to turn ugly, mainly because I have no desire to see you again. Taking a deep breath, I tried to calm myself. I warned her to keep her new partner away from me, expressing my disdain for his actions, and emphasizing that I wouldn't seek him out, but wouldn't tolerate any confrontation either. Gwen seemed pained by my harsh words, but I was past caring. I picked up my packed bags and left, informing her about the items I would be collecting the next day. The divorce proceeded without resistance. When my mother passed away, I had put the proceeds from selling her assets into a trust, based on advice from my accountant. Unfortunately, it turned out that this impacted my eligibility for student aid, contrary to what I had been advised. The accountant's misguidance led her business to close within a year, another disappointment and a series of letdowns. As a result, I had to take on student loans, although my company's loan repayment program was a saving grace, helping me manage the unexpected debt. The unfortunate experience with my accountant actually turned out to be beneficial in a way. Because I hadn't added Gwen as a trustee to the trust fund, the considerable amount it contained, around $600,000, remained untouched during the divorce. I relocated to a small, furnished loft near my workplace, wanting to distance myself from everything associated with my past life. I left most of the divorce proceedings to my lawyer. There was some negotiation regarding my 401k, but to expedite the process, I agreed to pay Gwen $15,000 and moved on. It later became clear why she didn't pursue spousal support. She was expecting a child and planning a wedding, contradicting her previous claims about wanting freedom. Professionally, I dedicated myself entirely to my work and was soon promoted to Improvement Assessment Coordinator for the company. We had acquired several smaller firms, and my role was to streamline their operations. I earned the nickname Hatchet Man for my approach to restructuring, often having to let go of long-standing, underperforming employees. While this made me unpopular among the staff, my focus was on improving the company's profitability, not on being liked. In terms of personal relationships, I became quite disillusioned with romance. Initially, I avoided dating entirely, feeling cynical about the idea of finding a meaningful connection. However, by the second year post-divorce, I felt a physical need but no desire for emotional attachment. With my financial means and frequent travel, I decided to engage with the adult industry for company. This arrangement was straightforward, with no expectations of a relationship or emotional ties. It seemed like a more practical approach than pursuing traditional relationships. I had completely lost track of what my ex-wife was up to, and frankly, I didn't care. Some might expect that I sought counseling to deal with my issues surrounding Gwen and my general distrust of women, but that wasn't the case. Counseling is beneficial for many, but I didn't feel the need for it. My life was filled with uncomplicated relationships, a healthy bank account, and a newfound passion for restoring old motorcycles. I had moved about an hour away and bought a spacious house on the outskirts of a small town, which came with a large outbuilding. Inside, I found a partially dismantled 1969 Triumph Bonneville. The previous owner had neglected to clear it out, so according to the purchase agreement, everything in the building was now mine. I loved the design of the bike and, being quite handy, I decided to restore it. I even bought a high-quality set of Mac tools for the job. When the original owner tried to claim the bike, I ended up paying him $500 for the title to avoid legal hassle. That bike started my hobby in earnest. Next, I found a 1963 BSA Gold Star Spitfire that needed work, and I was completely hooked. Although not a professional, I was improving with each project. My initial plan to sell each bike after restoring it didn't hold. Instead, I amassed a collection of beautifully restored vintage motorcycles. 7 years post-divorce, I was in a good place, financially stable, successful in my job, engaged in a fulfilling hobby, and leading a life free of complicated relationships. I was quite content until one day, I returned home with a new throttle cable for my latest bike and found an old, battered Toyota sedan in my driveway. As I parked, a woman stepped out of the car. I got out and found myself face to face with my ex-wife. "Jules, I would have avoided this if I could. I know I wronged you, and while I regret it deeply, I can't change the past. But this isn't about me, it's about our daughter," she blurted out. She handed me a photo of a cheerful little girl, missing a couple of baby teeth, and looking adorable. She looks sweet. It's unfortunate her mother's choices were so questionable, but why claim she's mine? Given the situation at the end of our marriage, her father could be anyone. "I recall there was a lot of talk about you at that time," I responded. She let out a heavy sigh. "Julian, you can criticize me all you want. I know I made terrible mistakes, but our daughter has leukemia and urgently needs a bone marrow transplant. We've exhausted all other options, and she's on a donor list, but that could take too long. I assure you, she's yours. Jeremy can't have children, and you were the only other person I was with. You can despise me, sometimes I despise myself. And if you feel like taking out your anger on me, I understand. But please, get tested to see if you're a match," she said, tears streaming down her face. I remained skeptical. "So, you're asking me to undergo a medical procedure for a child that may or may not be mine, raised by another man who has been there for all her significant moments I missed because of your actions. Has she even been told about me? Would she recognize me? I can't be considered her father, that role belongs to the man who raised her. And where is he now? I thought you two were in love, given how quickly you married after our divorce," I said, noticing a saddened expression cross her face. "Jeremy walked out on us after finding out he wasn't her biological father. His parents pressured him into taking a test, which showed no genetic markers in common between them. Jeremy is sterile, a fact he's likely been unaware of his whole life. I don't miss him, but it's heart-wrenching and infuriating that he abandoned Laura, especially when she needed him most in the hospital. You're right, he was the only father she knew, and his leaving devastated her. So, there's some retribution for you. I'm now a divorced single mother on welfare, struggling to care for a sick child," she explained. She went on, "My life has been a disaster these past 2 years. Any vengeance you could have wished upon me has already happened. The only good thing in my life since our divorce is Laura. If you want more information, you'll need to get tested. Here's the contact info and some more pictures of Laura. Please, Jules, consider getting tested." With that, she turned and hurried back to her car. Her departure was hampered by her car struggling to start. After she finally drove away, leaving oil stains on my driveway, I went to clean it up, contemplating her request. Despite my tough exterior, the thought of a child suffering tugged at my heart. Regardless of whether she was mine, no child should go through that. Surprisingly, I found myself deciding quite quickly to get tested. It turned out she was right. Laura was my biological daughter, and I was a suitable match for the bone marrow transplant. I arranged everything without informing Gwen. Meanwhile, I had a private investigator check Gwen's background, and it seemed her story checked out. Jeremy had indeed left her, even getting their marriage annulled. For 2 years, Gwen had been barely making ends meet with assistants and waitressing, spending most of her time in hospitals. The medical costs were overwhelming, even with Medicaid support. The situation was bleak for both her and Laura. The revelation of having a daughter led me to make some significant changes. I decided to sell my motorcycle collection, which I had previously been reluctant to part with. The money would be useful for her medical expenses and any back child support. The choice was surprisingly easy once I knew about my daughter. I even surprised the HR manager at work by requesting 4 weeks off and adding Laura to my insurance. I kept my interactions with her brief, knowing her tendency to gossip. When I visited the hospital, I brought along some paperwork for Gwen to sign and the largest teddy bear I could find. The sight of Laura, frail and connected to various tubes, was heart-wrenching. Her smile, despite her condition, shifted something in me. I knew then that I would do anything to protect her. Ignoring Gwen's attempt to embrace me, I approached Laura's bed. "Hey," was all I managed to say initially. "Hello, I'm Laura. Mom says you're my real dad," she replied. "Yeah, it seems I might be able to help you." "Oh, and I brought you this bear," I said, offering the teddy bear. Her eyes lit up as she reached for it, her smile widening. She hugged it tightly. "Thank you. What's his name?" she asked. I wasn't sure why a stuffed animal needed a name. "Well, they said you'd know his name when you saw him," I replied, trying to sound thoughtful. "It's Charlie," she declared confidently. "Hello, Charlie. Thanks for keeping me company," she said to the bear, then turned to me. "Thank you for bringing Charlie to me, Julian." I almost lost my composure right then. If I were in that little girl's place, I imagined I'd be full of anger and despair. Yet here she was, expressing gratitude for a simple stuffed toy. I glanced at Gwen and saw a look of fierce pride for her daughter. My respect for Gwen as a mother increased significantly. Despite everything, she had managed to raise such a resilient and appreciative child, though she had failed as a wife. Laura had fallen asleep again, clutching the teddy bear tightly. I felt a strong determination for the success of the transplant. I would do whatever was within my power to help. Nodding to Gwen, we stepped out to the cafeteria for coffee. I handed her the insurance paperwork. "Here's what you need to add her to my insurance. There's a $1,500 deductible, then it's fully covered. Thankfully, pre-existing conditions are still included in our healthcare plan. I've arranged to take over her medical bills. They should be cleared in a couple of months," I informed her. I didn't mention the $50,000 from my bike sales that I had set aside. Watching the stress leave her was astonishing. For a moment, she resembled the woman I once knew. I hadn't fully grasped the burden she was carrying. "Thank you, Julian. I know you have every reason to despise me, but I appreciate you doing this for her," she said, her eyes brimming with tears. "It's what I would have done if I'd known about her, Gwen. I had our company detective check into you and your ex. It seems you've been an exemplary mother. I'll deal with him later for neglecting my daughter. But don't think I've forgotten how you ruined our marriage for a fleeting thrill. I'll always hold you accountable for the milestones in her life that I missed. You might be a good mother, but you were a terrible wife," I told her. Gwen's head was bowed, and I could hear her sniffling. Once, such sounds would have broken my heart, but now they left me unaffected. I pushed another set of documents toward her. "This is a preliminary custody agreement," I began, causing her to look up quickly. "I don't plan to take her away from you, but I want to be a part of her life. I'm suggesting weekends, a month in the summer, and alternating holidays. Standard arrangements. Go through it, and we can talk about any modifications. I'll need her birth certificate and other documents. Do you have them with you?" She seemed to be searching my face for something, then looked down. "I'll need to get them for you. My car broke down, so I took the bus here. I'll bring them tomorrow," she replied quietly. Feeling hungry, I suggested, "Let's grab lunch outside the hospital while she sleeps, and we can get the documents after." She nodded, wiping her eyes. There I was, about to have lunch with a woman who had once meant everything to me, now just a connection through a shared child. Lunch was a silent affair at first, punctuated only by our order to the waitress. I had harbored so much anger towards Gwen, mentally preparing harsh words to throw at her. But sitting there, I couldn't bring myself to do it. I realized that I would have to interact with her for a long time because of our daughter. Gwen was already living the consequences of her choices, stripped of everything but her relationship with Laura. My need for retribution felt fulfilled. I didn't trust or particularly like her at this point, but I also couldn't find it in me to hate her anymore. "I'm not going to be aggressive," I clarified suddenly, the thought just occurring to me. Gwen reacted with a startled look. "You mentioned earlier that I might want to take out my anger on you physically. I want to make it clear that won't happen. In fact, I intend to work on letting go of my hostility towards you. We share a daughter, and I refuse to let her suffer from our issues. You may never be someone I respect, but for the sake of our daughter, I'm willing to put aside my negative feelings to ensure she has a nurturing and stable environment," I said, trying to make my intentions clear. A bit of tension seemed to leave her. "I know you wouldn't resort to violence, Julian. I just wanted to express," she began. "Hold on," I cut in, perhaps more abruptly than intended. "I'm not interested in apologies right now. What's done is done, and no words can undo the actions and choices you made. It's clear you didn't want our marriage, opting for infidelity instead of honesty. Your actions were premeditated, not mere slip-ups. You're not the victim here, and my sympathy is reserved for the impact of your decisions on our lives. If it weren't for our daughter, I would have no reason to interact with you. However, we do have a child together, and I'm committed to providing her with the best possible life, which includes having both parents involved. So let's focus on that and discuss how we can best support our daughter going forward." Gwen focused on her burger before looking up at me. For the next 20 minutes, we engaged in a surprisingly pleasant conversation about Laura and our plans to tackle her cancer treatment. When I drove to the area where Gwen and Laura lived, I was taken aback by the roughness of the neighborhood. I knew they were in government-assisted housing, but I hadn't expected it to be this bad. I parked my truck and stayed inside while Gwen went to retrieve some documents. The entrance to her apartment building was loitered by 3 guys who seemed to be up to no good. After about 15 minutes, Gwen emerged and walked past them. They attempted to corner her with unwelcome advances. My heart raced as I realized the situation was escalating. Reluctantly, I pulled out my axe, which I carried for protection but had never intended to use in a confrontation. I stepped out of my truck, aiming at the apparent leader of the group. I warned them, "She's got someone looking out for her. I suggest you back off before this gets ugly." My voice was unsteady, but I held the axe firmly, focused on the leader. One of the guys made a move as if reaching for something, but then thought better of it. There was a moment of tension, where the leader met my gaze unflinchingly, while his companions seemed more apprehensive. Gwen seized the opportunity to hurry to the safety of the truck. "I'm warning you, don't even think about reaching for a weapon. If you do, it's going to end badly. Let's just de-escalate this situation and allow us to leave peacefully. There's no need for this to get out of hand," I said, cautiously moving backward while keeping my axe aimed at the most threatening individual. Carefully, I retreated to the truck, maintaining a steady aim. Once inside and seated, I started the engine and shifted into drive, breaking eye contact only then. As we sped away, a sudden noise startled us, but I focused on getting onto the freeway as quickly as possible. After some time, feeling certain we weren't being followed, I slowed down. Gwen was visibly upset next to me. "You're not going back to that place," I said firmly. "What do you need from the apartment?" "Just our clothes, some dishes, and a few other things," she replied, trying to regain composure. "Most of our stuff is in storage, but I might lose it soon." "I'll get you new clothes and toys for Laura," I assured her. "We'll retrieve your things from storage, and you'll move into my house for now. It has 4 bedrooms and 2 bathrooms. You and Laura can each have one. You'll take care of the cooking and cleaning until you're back on your feet. No boyfriends at the house, and I won't bring any girlfriends over. I travel for work occasionally, but let's be clear, my house isn't a place for casual encounters. If I find out you're bringing men over, I'll consider going for full custody." Gwen looked at me, then down at the floor. "I'm not involved with anyone, Jules. I haven't had the time or interest for the past 3 years, and I don't foresee that changing. So, you don't have to worry about that. And thank you. I understand being around me isn't what you'd prefer, but having a safe place for us means a lot," she said softly. "You should thank Carlos," I replied. Carlos had been my best friend since childhood. We were an unlikely pair. I was from a modest background, while he was an adopted Hispanic kid in a wealthy family with older white parents. We were inseparable until he fell ill at 16. I spent as much time as I could with him in the hospital, watching helplessly as cancer took its toll. He passed away just before his 18th birthday, and his parents followed 3 years later. I often reflected on the love and support Carlos received from his parents, something I deeply envied. Now, I wanted to provide that same sense of love and support for my daughter. Though it was too late for me to change my past or become a well-adjusted adult, I was determined to give my daughter a better chance, even if it meant tolerating Gwen's presence for her sake. We managed to move Gwen and her belongings out of storage and set her up in the spare bedroom within the next couple of days. Admittedly, I might have gone a bit over the top decorating Laura's room, but she was my only daughter. The days leading up to the bone marrow transplant were tough for me. I've never been fond of hospitals, and it seemed like the nurses were using the dullest needles they could find, but I endured it. The whole process initially took about a week. Unfortunately, Laura's body didn't accept the first transplant, so we went through the ordeal again a week later. The second attempt showed some positive signs, encouraging the doctors to try a third time. Thankfully, the third transplant was successful. 4 months after the final treatment, I was able to welcome Laura to her new home. You might expect this to be the part of the story where Gwen and I rekindle our relationship. That, however, did not happen. I started to see Gwen as 2 separate individuals. There was Gwen the mother, warm, loving, supportive, and patient. She took excellent care of Laura and even me, teaching Laura at home to catch up on missed schooling, while managing the house and meals. Then there was Gwen the wife, who I couldn't forgive for her betrayal and for keeping my daughter a secret from me. Whenever I started to feel somewhat okay about Gwen, the anger about the past would resurface. Gwen seemed remorseful about how things turned out, but I wasn't ready to entertain any apologies. After using all my sick leave, I returned to work. The first day back was difficult, filled with longing for Laura and resentment towards Gwen for spending time with our daughter while I worked. This anger fueled my efficiency at work. I became ruthless in cutting expenses at my next project. The goal was a 7 to 12% reduction, but I managed to achieve a 16% cut by reducing employee benefits and laying off senior staff, including several managers. I could sense relief from the plant manager when my task was complete and I left. After finishing my work in the city, I had to wait until the next day for my flight home. I checked into a modest 2-star airport hotel, opting to spend the evening at the bar downstairs. I never chose luxurious accommodations on business trips, especially when the purpose was to reduce a company's overhead. Staying in high-end hotels would send the wrong message. At the bar, nursing an overpriced, diluted scotch, I noticed an attractive brunette enter. It was a familiar scene. She likely had an uneventful night elsewhere and was now here, perhaps looking to make the most of the remaining hours. Given my current state of mind and the solitude of the night, I was open to some company. We engaged in small talk, skirting around the topic of compensation. After ensuring my wallet and other valuables were secured with the front desk clerk, a precaution against potential theft, I invited her to my room. Even with a safe in the room, the risk of coercion through threats was real, and I preferred to play it safe. In the room, I placed $400 on the nightstand, a gesture that seemed to surprise her since our conversation had hinted at a lower amount. "I've been out of the loop for a while," I explained with a grin, "so I was hoping you might be open to spending some extra time, maybe just talking, tonight." I slept with her. She was a professional and kept things brief. After a while, she went to the bathroom to shower, which seemed reasonable considering we were both a bit sweaty. I decided to join her, and we casually washed up. Following the shower, we dried off and engaged in light conversation over a shot of whiskey. I shared a condensed version of my life story, and she listened, nodding and responding at appropriate moments. Our interaction resumed briefly, and afterwards, she got dressed, fixed her makeup and hair, took the money from the nightstand, and wished me well before leaving. I cleaned up and then went to bed, sleeping deeply. The next morning, on my flight home, I found myself reflecting on the previous night. It had been an adequate encounter, but something felt incomplete. I decided not to overthink it. My focus shifted to Laura, my daughter, who was doing well and getting ready for second grade. I thought about what gifts to buy for her. Maybe a tablet for drawing, or a cell phone. She was about to turn 9, and I wondered if it was appropriate. I realized I needed advice and planned to ask my assistant, who had kids. At the airport gift shop, I chose a stuffed frog for Laura, embracing my role as a father with newfound joy. Arriving home, the aroma of dinner was welcoming, but the real joy came from the enthusiastic squeal and hug from my daughter. She looked adorable in her new dress and ribbon-tied hair. "Mom got me this dress so I'd look nice for you, Daddy. And she says my hair's long enough for a new style. Do you like it?" she asked excitedly. I was overwhelmed with emotion, my eyes welling up. This little girl was the missing piece in my life. "You look absolutely beautiful, sweetheart. Your dress is lovely, and your haircut makes you look like a princess," I said, hugging her tightly and giving her a kiss. "I've got something for you, too," I added, pulling out the stuffed frog from the bag. "The lady at the store said he needs a name, and I thought you'd find the perfect one." She was thrilled, examining the toy before deciding. "His name is Randy." "Hi, Randy. You're going to be great friends with Charlie the bear," she declared. After another big hug, she scampered off to her room, leaving me touched by her affection. Gwen, who also seemed moved, caught my eye. For a moment, my good feelings faltered as I remembered she had deprived me of these moments for so long. I quickly quashed these bitter thoughts. I didn't want to become like my mother, allowing resentment to sour my life. I forced a smile. "Dinner smells great," I said, trying to keep my tone light. "Thanks, Julian. I dug up my old recipes and tried to make the chicken parmesan just the way you like it," Gwen replied. I was genuinely excited, remembering how delicious her chicken parmesan was. "I'm sure it'll be great," I said, acknowledging her effort to create a normal home environment for Laura. I was starting to appreciate the conveniences of having her around: clean clothes, a tidy house. Laura had been living with me for about 3 months, and she was a joy. If tolerating Gwen's presence was what it took to keep Laura close, I was willing to make that compromise. I had considered seeking primary custody, but my lawyer had explained the challenges given my job and lack of parenting experience. Besides, Laura needed her mother. A year had passed since they moved in. Laura had returned to regular school, thriving under Gwen's tutelage and consistently making the honor roll. Life was going well for me. I traveled for work, the house was well kept, and my daughter was everything to me. Gwen and I had found a sort of equilibrium in our cohabitation. Then Gwen surprised me by asking to use the car to look for a job. I had bought a reliable Subaru wagon for her and Laura's needs. It was safe and ran well, perfect for their transportation. Her initiative to find employment was unexpected but welcome. "Gwen, consider the car yours. If you ever move out, I won't use it, and it's not worth much for resale anyway. I'll transfer the title to your name. If anything happens to me, everything's arranged to go to Laura, held in trust until she's 18. Having a car will help you support her until she's independent," I offered. I noticed her eyes welling up with tears. "Thank you, Julian. You've been incredibly supportive, and I don't fully understand why. You know, I wouldn't keep you from seeing Laura, and child support wouldn't be much more than what you're already contributing by having us here. Why are you being so generous, especially to me?" she asked. I took a moment to gather my thoughts, realizing for the first time that my anger towards her had dissipated. It was no longer just an act for Laura's sake. The animosity had genuinely faded. My mother's bitterness deeply affected me and my sister. I didn't want to pass that on to Laura, so I suppressed it. If Laura hadn't come into my life, my feelings towards you would likely have remained negative. But things have changed. Simply put, if Laura cares for you, then I can too. I believe we can move forward amicably, if not as friends, I explained. Gwen approached and hugged me, tears flowing freely. My eyes, too, were unexpectedly misty. It was a relief to let go of the lingering anger and hurt. There was still some residual resentment, but it no longer dominated my feelings. Laura then walked into the kitchen, saw us hugging and crying, and decided to join in. We embraced each other, a family united in a moment of healing and understanding. My comment, everything he did was for his daughter. If that meant being civil to the ex, so be it. I hope you put her as priority over all other things.